This Real Agriculture podcast is brought to you by Genesis Fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's #1 expense. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planting a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more.
Hi everyone, welcome to the RealAg Issues Panel here on RealAg Radio and our RealAg YouTube channel. Thanks so much for following along. On today's Issues Panel, I've got with me Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, based out of Altona, Manitoba, and Cherilyn Jolly-Nagel. She's a farmer out of Mossbank, Saskatchewan. So we're going to tackle a whole host of issues this week. I think my list tops out at about 12 different things. So let's see how many we can get to on today's Issues Panel. Joining me now, it is the Issues Panel. Super exciting. Sean gave me the show and the panel. He's not even here. We can do whatever we want. Joining me out of Mossbank, Saskatchewan, is Cherilyn Jolly-Nagel. Hello, Cherilyn.
Good morning.
This is pretty exciting. We only have 3 segments, though, Cherilyn, so we're going to have to talk very quickly because we have a lot of things.
In 3 hours?
That's right. Doable. It's doable. That's right. There are some podcasts that are that long, and that just blows my mind. Exactly. Before bringing Kelvin, what's the weather like? Do you have snow in Mossbank?
Yes, we do have snow here in Mossbank. Not a lot, and not even enough to go ditch banging. So, it's just irritating at the moment. It's super windy. It is supposed to warm up a little bit come tomorrow, I think, but yeah, it's irritatingly windy and brisk and not all the fun, cool things like snow to play in.
Right. I know. It is the worst of both worlds, right? No snow and cold. Should be, yeah. Also joining us for the Issues Panel, Kelvin Heppner out of Altona, Manitoba, where it is a winter wonderland and everything is perfect, right?
Exactly. Yes, it is cold, and we have a good amount of snow on the yard. Not as much as normal at this time of year, but enough to for the kids to play outside. Not enough to go ditch banging here either, though.
I love that we have brought that term fully into. We're going to have all our American friends are going to be like, "What does that mean?"
You know what? I use the term stick handle all the time with colleagues in the U.S., and they're like, "Remind us again."
Yes.
What does it mean? It's a hockey reference, and it's lost on them.
Yeah. So winter is just a giant part of our culture, and therefore winter terms make their way into everyday conversation.
Yeah.
Speaking of, if any of you are trying to heat your home, you probably are paying carbon tax on it. But we saw this week, Kelvin, Stephen Guilbeault, our Minister of Environment and Climate Change, he said, "Don't worry. Everybody's getting a carbon tax rebate check this week, so everything's cool." Yes or no? Is everything cool in Manitoba with that check? Does it cover it all?
I don't think so. Definitely not. On an individual household, if you just look at your personal expenses and live in a small house, maybe it might, but that's not accounting for the carbon tax that's paid by your employer often in that case, and the general costs to the economy, that type of thing. So the communications around this the whole way through have been pretty poor, and this is another example of them basically doubling down, continuing with down the same path.
Cherilyn, do you guys going on vacation on that carbon tax check, or how much is that covering of the bill at your place?
Seriously, that messaging from him is so condescending. I'm just irritated by it altogether. Put the checks out. You're going to get some votes from that. So politically strategizing, I get it. Just put the checks out. But trying to pretend like it's somehow a wash just drives me mental. And the timing is good for this. David, my husband, got a check, the carbon climate action, whatever it is, check in the mail the other day. It's like $300 or something like this. I've never gotten one. Maybe I don't even make enough money to get one of these. I don't know how they calculate this. So he gets a check. I do not. And it's $300. And I think, in what world would they ever calculate that as a wash? I'm so irritated by it.
So go ahead, Kelvin.
We have the same thing here too. And again, like on a household basis, if I look at what we spend on fuel, where we pay a carbon tax, and we heat with electricity here in Manitoba, so don't have a carbon tax on it. But I got the same check, and it was the same situation in our household where I got it and my wife didn't. But and I don't know how
I
they
think it's
determine
because we're
that.
women. I don't think women
I think
get
that
the.
it's
Real on
carbon,
brand,
so yeah,
isn't
I,
it?
it's
I read
carbon,
I
so it's
read somewhere
male.
women don't get the climate action check. I read
Right.
that.
Yeah, we get the baby checks, Sherilyn. That's so it's not at all sexist at all.
But
That's
but what I was
true.
going to say is, if I look at our broader farm business, it comes nowhere close. Just like
Nowhere
Sherilyn says,
close.
in terms
Yeah.
of heating in our barns and other places that we pay the tax on fuel and energy, so it comes nowhere close. I do wonder, like the government did introduce this rebate for farmers of I think it's $1.73 for every $1,000 in eligible farming expenses. That's something that your accountant or you'll that's at tax time that rebate actually happens. But again, it's not directly linked with your consumption of or the amount of carbon tax that you pay. It's based on eligible farming expenses in total. And I think this is something where they've really lost the communications on this. This is I think Minister Guilbeault maybe was trying to refer to this rebate in addition to or on top of the checks that went out this week, but yeah, again, it's not clear and most people don't understand. And it's, again, insignificant in proportion to the amount that people are paying on their individual invoices that they get from their fuel suppliers.
Yeah. And this
But
is, I
that's
mean,
only.
no,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, Sherilyn.
It's the hidden ones that
Yeah.
drive me crazy. That Canadians we do not have the ability to calculate how much carbon tax we actually pay
Yeah.
because it's in all of the food production, of
Yeah.
course, is on the farming side, but the freight, the transportation to get food and other basic necessities that go all the way across this massive country, that's not calculated anywhere.
No.
You know, that little check that we got that wouldn't even be the carbon tax we pay just to Sask Power or
Yeah.
just to Sask Energy or
Yeah.
those are the ones that aren't hidden because it's an actual line item
Yeah.
on our power bills, which I appreciate. But the rest of it is all just hidden and mixed in there. And the question is, if the farmers were not forced to pay the carbon tax, would the climate have changed at all? Not even a little bit.
Yeah.
Not 1 degree.
Well, and also, if we're supposed to think about a tax is supposed to change behavior, which I'm not sure how we have an HST then, but whatevs, that's a bit different. But if a tax in this sense is supposed to change behavior, how I still don't. No one has been able to explain to me how this changes behavior in that realistically we've lost any connection between, what's paid or change behavior or what programs are available potentially to adopt differences that often don't even come close or they're not available or they don't work. I know that, this check in the mail or the direct deposit in your account, originally it was assessed on your taxes and done that way, but that was too hidden as far as the benefit that the feds were giving you. So now we turn around and we're going to mail out checks. Like to me, it's just political. It's not actually in any way an intelligent way to do this. And I've done the little calculator thing, and honestly, you're right, both of you, that it does not account for a whole bunch of ways that we pay the carbon tax. It doesn't account for that. And honestly, it is basic family, like a model family that I don't even know exists that would actually come out ahead. And again,
And it only counts, again, the direct expenses, not all the
exactly,
indirect
not the
places
hidden
it adds up.
ones.
Yeah.
And does that change behavior? Like the idea is, well, if you got $300, but you spent, you only spent 200 in a carbon tax, then you're ahead. Well, but it still gets whittled down to almost nothing, even in that scenario. So I wanted to leap off this because the week that this is happening, we also saw from the Ag Carbon Alliance this week, I started getting emails, and I'm sure the two of you have as well, from different producer groups that are asking farmers to show us your receipts. Kelvin, have you got any of these emails?
Yeah, I have. They've launched this campaign, I guess, together with what happened in the Senate leading into the holiday season with Bill C-234 being amended and all the different campaigns that were done there in terms of trying to convince senators to follow through on the will of the House of Commons and get this legislation across the finish line. Now, of course, C-234 is going back to the House of Commons, and the House will resume sitting after next week, the last week of January. And so this will be back in the headlines. And Now the Liberal government will, if they want to continue blocking this, they will have to stand up and have their MPs stand up and actually block it instead of having so-called independent senators who really seem to be taking their direction from the Liberal government, but at least there was that plausible deniability factor there. That won't be there anymore. And so as especially you get to Eastern Canada where there's some rural Liberal seats that are really on the line based on what we're seeing in the polls so far, there will be some pressure on MPs in the Liberal Party to continue or to support and voice that support for C234, which would again exempt the use of or the carbon tax on farm uses of propane and natural gas. But yeah, it's going to be in the headlines here for the coming months, and of course, the Conservative Party continues to make this a priority. Poilievre, their leader, talking about the next election being a carbon tax election.
Mm-hmm. Which the sooner it happens, the better for the Conservatives. But we know it's on. We know it's October 2025 at the latest. But I guess anything can happen. So, Cherilyn, of course, you don't run a barn, but you've got plenty of grain. What do you keep the carbon tax line item where you can find it? Do you keep tally of that and track it?
Yeah, we do the best we can with our bookkeepers and our accountants to try to put a line item so that we can try to track that. But again, it's the hidden costs of that. And I don't want to quash the initiative that is show your receipts. I do want farmers to the best of their ability to send those in. But I don't think it actually grasps the impact of the carbon tax. I think they were asking for receipts from, and I'm quoting this, essential farm operations. And so they listed a few like irrigation, like heating, like grain drying, heating your barn, all of those things. But in my humble opinion, the most essential part of farm operation is fuel. Nothing happens without fuel in general. So if you think about liters of fuel that would go through a farm operation, at 15 cents a liter, like do the math on those numbers. It's hard. I want to contribute in the show your receipts so that I feel like I'm, you're doing my best to prove it. But how do you calculate? I don't have an invoice for all of the fuel at 15 cents a liter, the tens of thousands of dollars that farmers are paying just in that portion of it. So again, I don't want to quash the initiative. If we need to have these kinds of things go through to show physical evidence of what it costs, then great. But we're missing like the big number.
Mm-hmm. And Kelvin, I was going to say, we also saw, and the mushroom farmer here in Ontario who sort of got famous for being referred to as, my question on this initiative is, I agree. I think it's important that we put some real numbers to this, but we also saw the reaction from the government when faced with real numbers was basically, well, they can afford it. So, Kelvin, do you think we'll change that opinion or that narrative at all?
That was kind of at least from some of the senators, especially as C234 was in the Senate in fall, was kind of their message. And again, to go back to what Cherilyn said about a condescending message, talk about a condescending message in terms of, well, then at least you guys can afford it and you don't need to worry. We don't need to help you guys because you can afford it. No, but it's all about competitiveness. And that's not it is putting people out of business. It can be a tipping point in terms of putting people over. And so in terms of your question about the Show Your Receipts campaign, Lyndsey, sorry, I went down a political trail there. I didn't talk about the campaign, but I can speak specifically to our farm. I track it on a monthly basis, our monthly natural gas bill, and our percentage that we pay on carbon tax in our barns. So we have poultry, and heating our barns would be our third highest expense on an annual basis. Operating expense after feed would be the highest, then actually the birds themselves that we pay for, and then keeping the barns heated. And it's consistently up in that 30 to 33% range lately of our natural gas bill is the carbon tax and the GST that they charge on the carbon tax.
That's right. Which we're running out of time. We have to take a break. Yeah. But this is the other thing that we don't always talk about.
From 20 to 30. It's into the 30% now of our heating cost in our barn is carbon tax.
And here's the point that Canadians need to understand: we are taxing food production. Is that really a value the Canadians have? Is that really where you want to generate tax dollars, is from food production? I don't think so.
Yeah. Kelvin, let's start, because it's your favorite topic, inflation. We did get some Canadian numbers, and they're not good for those of us waiting for interest rates to come back down.
Yeah, a tick up again, up about, I think it's 0.3 of a percentage point. 3.4% was the headline inflation in the month of December. So, like you said, this will feed the Bank of Canada narrative, and this is something that we've been seeing in other countries as well. The U.S. last week we talked about this, Europe as well this week. Inflation showing that it is sticky, and this is sounding like a broken record here, but I think this is something that we've kind of seen coming in terms of being tougher to bring it down than what was expected by central bankers, and also what us as individual borrowers are maybe hoping for when it comes to borrowing rates. But now it's pushed back expectations to kind of the middle of this year in terms of when we could see a pivot to rate cuts. The bond markets, if you look at what the market is pricing, a few weeks ago, they were still pricing 150 basis point cuts, so 1.5% cut to interest rates before the end of this year. Well, if we get into the middle of the year before they start making cuts, you're running out of number of decisions, or they've got to move dramatically if they're going to move that far. So right now, I think the bond markets the last couple of days have been pricing in about a 1% cut to interest rates before the year end. So that's kind of what the market's expecting, but it keeps getting pushed back, and data like we saw this week from in terms of Canadian inflation data is supporting that.
Well, and what worries me a little bit is, of course, that is sticky. That inflation number is not necessarily, I mean, we saw it come down, we have seen it come down, but this last little bit is probably going to be the hardest. The problem is the longer it stays where it's at, the more it sort of feeds into how much more people are paying for things. Fuel prices don't seem to be coming down anytime soon, especially with all the global issues happening with our logistics and in the Red Sea region, which we heard about this week on the Frontlines podcast. So it worries me that, I guess the thing is, nothing is certain until it happens, right? So it looks less likely that that's going to happen. Now, we did have, I got to say, this week was really busy for announcements, and not surprisingly, I suppose, as we get back into the swing of things, into the farm show season and conferences, etc. We did see this week, or last week, I guess, but talked about it this week. The Farm Credit Canada has announced a sustainable incentive for those that do their lending with FCC that aren't necessarily part of some of the other programs they're partnered on, but lenders, those who are borrowing money from FCC that qualify under the 4R stewardship program, working with an agronomist, can qualify for up to $2,000 in an incentive. Cherilyn, do you think this moves the needle on 4R adoption?
Well, this is kind of the first I'm hearing about this incentive. So I mean, $2,000, I would up to $2,000. That's always the tricky part. First of all, good on FCC for wanting to throw something back. But also, I'm pretty sure ag experts got to be at the $500 a year mark, maybe north of that. So still, so some money is going to come back. But the 4R program, like that kind of checklist, in order to be compliant with that, I'm assuming you've got to have variable rate. So you're looking at, call it $10 an acre for variable rate. So, I mean, it's expensive to meet those kinds of targets. So I wouldn't call this an incentive. Up to $2,000, I would not call that any sort of actual incentive to change any sort of behavior. No.
So it's if you borrow up to $400,000, or if you have up to $400,000 in lending, you would qualify for the full $2,000. So it's prorated up to that, meaning
it's kind of like winning a free Go mug or something like that. All of these things just kind of get in the what when you think
swirled.
It sounds like a big number, $2,000. It's not. It's not a big number at all.
Mm-hmm. Kelvin, this is in addition to several other programs. Now, the one thing I will say is and someone who is with FCC or part of these, let me know. But I do think some of these are additive. So that's the one difference that maybe might help is that, so FCC, they have a Cargill connection, they have the CRSB connection, they have the Ducks Unlimited. Like this is the 6th program, I think. And I think these are additive, meaning you would qualify for both, but all of them are capped at $2,000. So Kelvin, same question to you. Would an incentive like that on your lending make you change what you do as far as 4R, try and adopt more of those practices? Is it enough?
No, I don't think it is enough to really change behavior. It would be a nice token if you were already doing this kind of thing. And on the potato side of things, they have a program with
Right.
McCain's. That's
Yeah.
where I think it's additive. McCain's is paying potato growers on top of this. But I do wonder whether there's also opportunity cost in this. And this is something that again, maybe somebody at FCC can clarify. But what about that market for carbon offsets that we talked about years ago that was going to be this big new revenue stream for farmers? If you take this money, are you potentially precluding yourself from seeing benefit elsewhere because of the double dipping that is there's going to be all kinds of rules around double dipping, and if you take this incentive for implementing 4R, are you still eligible for other incentives for implementing 4R that could be offered potentially? I think this is where farms, the green accounting cost is going to could potentially be a significant expense down the road.
Well,
also,
and
you guys,
yeah, go ahead.
fundamentally, do we really want any sort of, financing tied to obscure environmental farm practices? Like, I don't want to have any ties whatsoever between the financial institutions, Crown or otherwise, with environmental farm practices. Those two things should not be together.
But it is, I think, something that
That way,
we're
though,
seeing
the banking
more
industry.
of. Yeah. And it's an excellent point, Cherilyn, is that what we want? Does it get us where we need to go? Is it, and I would say that, and if Sean were here, he'd probably iterate some of the conversations he had this week on this exact topic, that there is definitely some concern on the landscape that, instead of it just being your numbers, which are numbers are what they are, right? Yes, you can, maybe make an argument around your numbers, but numbers are what they are. Your return on investment, your capital assets, your whatever those are. And as a lender, you should be judging a business on its health, right? And that's based on numbers. So to add a layer of what that business is doing, we are seeing more of that for sure. And I would say, I think we are seeing more of this trend to practices and different things are actually getting into the mix of maybe not approving or not alone, but potentially impacting the rate that you might get, or potentially exactly that, some of the incentives.
That makes me mad because farmers will, when there's a new farm practice that comes out or a new technology that we're looking at adopting, they're going to figure out the return on that investment. So it may take more time for one farm operation than another farm operation, but let the expert that is the farmer determine when that makes the most sense for them, rather than another pressure coming from the financial institution that, I'm sorry, does not have the agricultural expertise any more than government does than the farmers do. They're always, underplaying the expertise that farmers have as it comes to these sustainable practices.
And sustainability seems to be the word of the week too, Kelvin. We also saw sustainable aviation fuel get a funding boost this week, which we could see processing happening in Manitoba. Was there any buzz of that at Egg Days this week?
I didn't hear any, but there was an announcement, Canada Infrastructure Bank money and going towards the Azure processing facility that's proposed at Portage La Prairie, using canola to produce sustainable aviation fuel. They also have projects in the U.S. and I believe one in BC as well that they're working on, as expectations there too of demand for this renewable fuel for airlines down the road, which from a farming perspective, sure, it's good to have that demand. But again, going back to our earlier conversation about inflation and all of these initiatives tend to add costs. And so that needs to be part of the conversation here in terms of the trade-offs here.
Yeah.
we can move ahead with implementing these climate policies, whether it's renewable fuels, whether it's carbon tax, but there needs to be part of the conversation, the impact that they have on bottom line cost of living and just inflation in general. I think part of what's driving this sticky inflation is government policies that we haven't had a fair conversation about the impact that they actually have on costs to consumers.
You're understating it, not part of what's attributing to it. It's bigger than that. They are the reason we're here today.
So now, Cherilyn, Saskatchewan is a huge producer of canola. This is, already a feedstock for some biofuels. Sustainable aviation fuel would be another one of those. How do you balance, markets for a crop that you grow with an increasing consideration of inflation and these sorts of things? I mean, are you pro biofuel, sustainable fuel, or how do you sort of add those two up?
Yeah, back when we first started talking about biofuels, like so many decades ago, there was this debate around food production versus, fuel production. But I've always been in the camp that we should be using what we grow for so many different, so many different things. I mean, cotton shirts. I mean, suppose the argument could be made that land that grows cotton could be used for land that grows food production. I mean, it's kind of silly to me to think that every piece of land has to be dedicated to food production. I drink coffee, okay, and it might be a beverage, but it's not food production, so I'm not willing to give up that. So I don't think that argument works for me. I think everything that we grow needs new and better markets all the time. We've got, all kinds of canola announcements that have happened in this province over the last couple of years, and I'm excited by all of them, even if only some of them come to fruition.
Mm-hmm. It is a good. I think that the food versus fuel debate, I don't think it's going to disappear by any stretch, but I would hope that it is a more intelligent conversation than it used to be. But hope isn't necessarily a plan, so we'll see where that goes. Okay, I did mention, Kelvin, that you were in Brandon this week at Manitoba Egg Days. Cherilyn also did some traveling, less exciting. She was in Japan, but we'll start with Brandon just quickly. Egg Days. How was it? We've got some really cool inventions and innovations that are going to make their way, but you also got to chat with Manitoba's new old ag minister. So what was the feeling at Ag Days this week?
I think
it's true. And old in the sense that he was also, I guess I should say,
former.
Yes. Current and former. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
I think the vibe was quite excited. I think Ag Days is always one of the highlights, if not the highlight of the year in Manitoba for a lot of farmers. And I'm always blown away just by the amount of people, first of all, that are involved in our industry. And you actually get to see them there when you have tens of thousands of people under one roof like that. And the best part to me is always just seeing people that I haven't seen in a long time and catching up with them and hearing about how things are going on their farms and in their businesses and that type of thing. But I think in general, there's a fair bit of concern right now about the markets and what we've seen with prices over the last couple of months and margins and profitability and costs. Of course, we have all these conversations surrounded by the best, biggest, brightest, shiniest new equipment at Egg Days. And so that I think was certainly a theme in the conversations. And yes, I did get to sit down with Minister Kostyshin, who was Manitoba's ag minister under the previous NDP government back in 2016 would have been when they were defeated in the election. And so he's back in power, or back as the agriculture minister as of October. And so got to sit down with him and talk about kind of what their plans are for the ag sector. And right now, it's still the early days. I think they're still trying to figure out what their policies are on a lot of front, and they're doing a lot of outreach because the NDP certainly don't have strong representation in rural agricultural parts of the province.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of same as however many years ago. Not a lot has changed in that space in between. Okay, we're going to take
he is a fan of protein, of value. He did say he's a fan of the protein strategy that the previous government implemented, which is emphasizing protein processing, whether it's animal on the pork and poultry side of things, beef side of things or on the plant side of things. And I think that's good news because the previous NDP government here in Manitoba actually put a ban or a moratorium on on the hog industry. And so for him to say that he's planning to continue that is certainly a positive signal for people invested in that sector, in those sectors.
Cherilyn, unlike going to Brandon, which is a huge event, you had a tiny little trip to Japan before the holidays. What was that all about?
Props to you, Kelvin. I love Brandon. I love going to Manitoba Egg Days. I used to go every year, but I didn't make it this year. So I've been following up on all your feed. It was a good show by the sounds of it. But Japan, I mean, this was an incredible trip, an incredible opportunity. I was going to speak at a conference put on by the Japanese Biotech Crop Network. And this organization is led by a fellow Global Farmer Network member, Suichi Takamoto, who he and I have become friends since meeting up in Argentina last year. And this guy is just so full of energy and excitement and just gets his shit done. Okay, he put on this conference in less than a year. So the point of me coming to be there was to talk as a farmer about biotechnology, the use of that on our farm, and also, no-till practices. It's impossible to talk about GMO canola and not talk about no-till. So that was the basis of the presentation. But here's the background. Japanese farmers do not have accessibility to GM crops. They are not allowed to grow them, which is mind-blowing to me because Japan is a major importer of Canadian canola, which is genetically modified. So a bit selfishly, my fear is that either consumers or Japanese farmers are going to start to make a stink about that at some point, just like what happened in Italy when the farmers were like, why do Canadian farmers using glyphosate get to come in and we don't get to use it? These are trade issues. So I wanted to go and build that relationship, and also be supportive of the farmers who are trying to access this technology and show them what the benefits are. But here's the catch. Here's what I decided to do different. I brought my family with me. So I have 2 teenage daughters that have been so active on the farm operation. They run every piece of equipment. They're crop checking. They're doing all of these things. They have never lived a day on this farm that didn't grow genetically modified crops. This is almost an archaic science that we're still trying to advocate in other countries. So I wanted them to introduce biotechnology to the crowd, but also to showcase that if they're going to come back to a farm operation, they're going to need something a little jazzier than GM canola, right? They're already looking for what else is coming my way. So, and that was so effective for them to see these 2 young girls, these massive pieces of equipment, the high clearance sprayers and the combines, and for the Japanese farmers and the participants in the conference to see these girls in these kinds of roles on a farm operation and advocating for science and technology. It was just like proud parent moment, but so effective. They're the future of farming, not me anymore. So if they need new technology and science, you got to give it to them. It was fantastic.
Now I have to ask, did you volunteer them to do this or did they want to? Because
almost like me a little bit,
a
Lyndsey.
Little bit. Mm-hmm.
But here's what I did. I told them about the concept. I said, I'd really love for you to participate. Also, you're not allowed to say no. But I'm going to give you 1 PowerPoint slide. You pick the pictures because teenage girls don't want me picking the pictures.
That's
you
correct.
Pick the pictures of you in the fields and operating. And I want 10 to 12 sentences. You don't need to share them with me ahead of time. You're not allowed to bring your phone on stage, so either memorize them or write them down on a piece of paper. And that was it. It was a little trusting on my part
Yes.
and on theirs, I suppose. But it was flawless. They had some great questions, great conversations. They knocked it out of the park. Maybe it's a road show. It's a teachers go on strike in Saskatchewan a long period. I'm thinking this is my backup plan.
Yeah.
I'm going to take this show on the road.
I think that's a great plan, which of course teacher strikes, I feel like we sort of have to prepare for them all the time now, regardless of what province you're in. So I think that's a great idea. So it is fascinating. And before we leave the topic of Japan, everyone, listen to me right now, wherever you are. Cherilyn, we need to do better in Canada by one other standard that you mentioned.
In terms of technology,
Yes.
Canada, listen to me, people. Canada needs to up our game related to toilets. Okay?
Yes.
The toilet situation in Japan is second to none. It doesn't matter if you're in the subway, in a high-class fancy restaurant, in a hotel, or in a park. Those toilet seats are heated. They're heated. And they have this beautiful, there's the bidet, so you get the wash, you get the washer and the dryer. So fun. I dare you not to try it. But also there's this little nature button that you can hit that is music. You just listen to the music. It's privacy, I think, when I Google translated it. It's called privacy. So you hit that and you just have these beautiful nature sounds while you're doing your business.
I love it.
Canada needs to up their game.
At the very least, we need the heated seats. I mean, we have them in all our vehicles standard now. Come on. It's so minus 40 at times. Like, come on. Okay. So that's on our to-do list is Canada needs.
They have those in Brandon, Kelvin?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe somewhere. I didn't find them. No.
No. And you didn't need Google Translate on your phone to figure out what the buttons did. No. It's like the three seashells. Anyway. Okay. We only have a couple minutes left, and we mentioned this on the show last week with Tyler McCann, but Kelvin, you did write up an article on the sustainable ag strategy, that the What We Heard document, and that what we heard was that they didn't want us to apparently find it because it was released very quietly. So that is up on realagriculture.com. What has the feedback been this week? Did you get any while you were out and about in Brandon this week as well?
Yeah, I've actually received quite a bit of feedback on social media as well as in person in Brandon. Had quite a few people come up and say, hey, that sustainable ag strategy piece, here are my thoughts on it, kind of thing. And so I think in general, people are that we're quite concerned about restrictions and new red tape and government telling farmers how to farm through this strategy. There was a lot of concern about that. And I think the possibility or the prospects of it fading away and maybe even being mothballed at this point, which is kind of the premise of what the column talked about, it being a signal how quietly they published this report on the Friday before the New Year's long weekend. I don't know for sure that the government's going to go down that path, but potentially there are still some activist-minded people in the bureaucracy at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and of course in Environment and Climate Change Canada. But I don't think Minister McCauley is the one who's going to be driving that. And so I think in general, the feedback I received was that people are kind of breathing a sigh of relief that maybe the sustainable ag strategy won't be as burdensome as it potentially could have been.
Cherilyn, have you been following this story? Did you participate at all?
It was absolutely good news that it came out quietly the way they did. Look, no government is ever going to come out and say, hey, we're sort of wrong about anything. So this document is a win for us. To me, they took a huge, big step back in some of their really absurd, government forward recommendations and talk. I was really nervous when this first came out. So I think the document is a huge win for us. It's also a bit ridiculous. When you read through the priorities of the sustainable ag strategy, they're all the same priorities that farmers have always had. Mitigation to climate. Yep, we've always done that. Resilience to climate, biodiversity, water quality, soil health. There's nothing shocking or new about these priorities. Farmers have always had these priorities. You show me one successful intergenerational farm family that didn't always have those things on their list of priorities. It's silly to me, but the government, really thought they needed to come in and help farmers do better. But we showed them that we're doing pretty darn good without,
And I think we can add this to a heap of files already where the current government has introduced a policy direction, then consulted, and then bailed or backed off
it. Yeah.
Because they did it in the wrong order. The consultations maybe should have happened before the policy direction was chosen by government and announced. Seed value creation, small business tax changes. I don't know. Those are some of the examples that come to mind in terms of where this has happened too.
And this one for sure too, right? And I guess, I will say maybe the only silver lining in that, or the direction that they've done, or the order they've done this, is that it did light a fire under some butts for sure. But it also has created a lot of friction and a lot of, that condescension, and that we know better, and that all that, and that misunderstanding has not helped the relationship. So, I mean, there's two sides of it. I think people were very motivated to speak up, and there was decent, what we heard, contributions, etc. So, I mean, that's a positive, I guess, because let's face it, not everybody loves to fill out surveys or, go to government consultations, etc. So it's a tall ask at times to get that feedback, but realistically, I think it also has just damaged this relationship between, the farming public or the farming industry and government for sure. I will say I did find interesting, I think one of the things that stands out to me, because I did read it, and I know that maybe a lot of people won't, or wouldn't even have heard of it if we didn't cover it. But one of the things I think that was positive in there is in that sort of what we heard was, I feel like they got the message that any of these programs or discussions or funding has to be through an economic lens. Even if you still move forward with what you're doing, you've got to recognize either the cost or the trade-off or the, and maybe to the good, or, is this a practice that we really need to have happen, but it's very expensive? You've got to address that gap. Like, you have to look at things through an economic lens. So that, I think, was one of the things, and it's pretty high up there as far as what's listed. So I guess there's a difference between hearing and listening. So we'll see what happens, or if this just sort of gets parked. That is all the time we have for today's show. I think we could probably do, as Cherilyn said, another few hours, but we can't, because we'll get, and I'll never be allowed to host again. Exactly. All right. Yeah. So Cherilyn, have a wonderful weekend. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Great to see you.
All right, Kelvin, stay warm.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
All right. And that does it for me. I'll be back next week, of course, for RealAg Radio on Tuesday. If you've got any feedback, give us a call, 1-855-776-6147, or find us across social media at RealAgriculture. Cheers, everybody.